The Grind Line, The Gears That Powered the Detroit Red Wings to the Summit, by Keith Gave, 2025. Narrated by Bob Brill. Forward. Very much like when I came to Detroit 2 decades later, Montreal in the early 1970s was a team in transition when I first started coaching there. We won the Stanley Cup in my second year there, but really, we were probably the third best team in the National Hockey League. We were far from a great team. Sam Pollock, the general manager, had made some great draft choices. Guy Lafleur, first overall in 1971, Steve Shutt, 4th overall in 1972, and we got Bob Gainey with the number 8 pick in 1973. They were young, but when they began to mature, all of a sudden we had a pretty good team. It wasn't until 1974, however, when we got 2 guys in the first round who wound up being great role players, that our team really started to transform. We drafted Doug Riseborough with the 7th overall pick, and then 5 picks later, we got Mario Tremblay. Neither was an elite offensive player, but both those guys were really smart players who could fight. They weren't heavyweights, more like middleweights, but nobody their size was going to beat them. They didn't have to fight the big guys because we had some big guys too, and those guys didn't fight much anyway. Suddenly, teams weren't pushing us around anymore. Then we brought up a guy we had in the minors, Yvon Lambert, who was actually drafted by Detroit. But just as he was coming into his own, Ned Harkness traded him to us. Now we had a pretty good line of players who knew their role and accepted it. Scrappy, great defensively, almost impossible to score against, but able to contribute offensively too. Those 3 guys on a team with 7 or 8 Hall of Famers made all the difference. That's the thing that people don't realize about good role players. We might have had a star-studded lineup, but when we'd go into some places, I wanted to set the table, establish a trend right from the outset as to how we intended to play that night. In Detroit, that's when I would always try to start Kris Draper, Kirk Maltby, and either Joe Kocur or Darren McCarty, for the simple fact that they were not going to be outworked. They may not score, but neither would the other team, and their work ethic would spill over to the rest of the team. That's what made Steve Yzerman the player he was. He might have been a skilled player, but he was also a worker. He didn't take games off. Neither did those guys who played for me on the Grind Line, one of the most important units in all those years from the first Stanley Cup title in 1997 to the last of 4 in 2008. By the time that line came together, Detroit had had some very good luck in the draft. In 1989, they got Hall of Famers Nicholas Lidstrom and Sergei Fedorov, along with Vladimir Konstantinov, who was on his way to the Hall of Fame before his career ended in that limo crash. In 1990, the Wings added Slava Kozlov in the 3rd round and used a 2nd-round pick in 1992 to select Darren McCarty. Finally, Detroit was adding some extraordinary talent in a nucleus of support around Yzerman. But as some of those early exits in the playoffs suggested, our roster was still a work in progress. It wasn't until we made a couple more trades that I felt we finally had a team to make a serious run in the postseason. We got Kris Draper in a 1993 trade with Winnipeg, and a few years later we got Kirk Maltby from Edmonton. What's interesting is, at the time, both trades were considered minor deals made to bolster the minor league club in Adirondack, not necessarily to crack the lineup in Detroit. Maltby was surprised we traded for him. He looked at our roster and wondered how he would ever get any ice time. But he's the kind of player who enjoys making his presence known with his play. Loved to hit, and he was a pretty good agitator who embraced his role, so he fit right in. But it was Draper who really helped to flesh out our roster on and off the ice. He always had a lot of energy, always a pepper pot, always positive. I don't think I ever saw him get discouraged. He was a really good skater, and he was excellent in the faceoff circle. Winning faceoffs is all desire, and I think Kris felt he had to go out and win faceoffs, or he'd never get on the ice. The truth is, we couldn't keep him out of the lineup, but it was a challenge. At one point early on, I had to have a talk.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?